Chapter 20. The Electoral Special Commission Bill. A messenger holding a large envelope walks through the crowd gathered outside the Tilden estate. He is stopped when he reaches a couple of guards at the front steps. Due to the election chaos and the resulting rise of violence, Mary requested that Mr. Smith hire more security for the Tilden's Gramercy Park home. Through his contacts at the local police precinct, Smith was able to procure a half a dozen off-duty officers. Though Samuel didn't favor this action, he realized it was necessary to add protection for family, friends, and neighbors to keep them safe. One of the guards takes the envelope from the messenger, reviews it, and hands it back to him. The man then climbs the steps to the front door and knocks to announce his arrival. The envelope has printed on it, "Strictly confidential, from Congressman Abram Hewitt." Inside the house, Mr. Smith hears the door knocking, ignores it and continues diligently working at his desk. Concentrating on the paperwork before him, he takes little notice as one of the butlers walks to the door and opens it. He looks up after he hears, "Confidential, for Mr. Tilden from Congressman Hewitt." After he hears the front door shut, Mary enters the room shortly after with the envelope in hand and says, "Sorry to disturb you, Mr. Smith. This just arrived by special messenger and is marked confidential from Hewitt. I didn't want it to get mixed up with the other mail." Smith acknowledges Mary, "Yes, thank you." He reaches over and takes the envelope, reads the label, and without pause stands up, "Your brother will want to read these right away." Mr. Smith walks into the reading room and without a word hands the envelope to Samuel, who is seated at his desk, then quietly exits. Samuel eyes the label and reaches for a letter opener and carefully slices open the envelope and takes the documents out and lays them neatly on his desk before reviewing them. The papers Samuel has in his possession is the third draft of the Electoral Special Commission Bill drafted by Congress. Just as he begins to read the contents, Mr. Smith enters the room again. Samuel lays the report down on his desk and looks up and quietly asks, "What is it, Mr. Smith?" Smith is holding a telegram in his hand. "My apologies for imposing on you again, but just received a wire from Attorney Whitney." Samuel nods, knowing Mr. Smith rarely distracts him unless it's important. "Go ahead, read it out loud." Mr. Smith adjusts his glasses then starts to read the cipher loud enough for Samuel to hear. Attorney Whitney says, "You should consider forcing a modification of the resolution in order to preserve the constitutional right of the two houses to participate equally in the count. That is all we want, and the country is with us." Samuel tells Mr. Smith, "Wire him back and tell him his suggestion will be considered and that I and others here truly appreciate his input and their support." Mr. Smith nods in agreement and walks out of the room. Samuel picks up the proposed bill from the table and begins to study it closely. 15 minutes later Samuel hears another knock at the door. He faintly hears the familiar voice of his best friend John Bigelow talking to his butler, "Hello Thomas, please tell Samuel I'm here and if he's not too busy." Samuel grins when he hears the exchange between Bigelow and Thomas. Without pause Bigelow hands his coat and hat to the butler and quickly rephrases, "On second thought, no introduction necessary. He likes when I surprise him." For a rare moment, the butler is amused. "Very well, sir," he knows that any interruption by Tilden's best friend will be welcomed by his boss. The butler turns and walks toward the coat room with Bigelow's coat and hat. Bigelow proceeds to the reading room where Samuel is seated and patiently waiting for his entrance. The moment Samuel sees Bigelow he waves the papers in his hand at him. Bigelow asks, "What have you got there?" He reaches out and politely takes the papers from Samuel's hand. After reading the first few lines, Bigelow looks at Samuel and asks, "The McCrary House bill? How did you get it so soon?" Samuel winks and warns, "This is strictly confidential." Bigelow smiles as Samuel hands him the papers and before starting to read them he asks, "You don't trust me?" Samuel looks back at his closest friend and says, "You dare ask me that question?" Bigelow answers with a huge smile, "I do." Samuel's mood switches to serious and he declares his true beliefs to John: "You are my best friend and confidant. I trust no one more than I do you." Bigelow hands the papers back to Samuel, and declares, "Yes, we are a rare team and I'm honored by your faith in me. I'm a known Republican and you a Democrat reformer, both trying our best to stop corruption at the highest level in our federal government." John continues as he walks over to a table where coffee and some fresh fruit are beautifully displayed on the table and declares, "My former party is coming at us full tilt and carpetbag Democrats from the South are helping them to cut better deals for their greedy selves to keep the colored folks from their full civil rights." John picks up the coffee carafe and fills a cup, then informs Samuel with dissatisfaction on his face, "I've heard secrecy has been imposed on all committee members." Samuel stays in his chair and flips through the papers. Revisions provide for a commission of 15 members, 5 from the House, 5 from the Senate and 5 from the Supreme Court. The judges will be determined by putting the names of the senior justices into a hat and drawing out one. There's to be 7 Republicans and 7 Democrats. The draw for the 15th member would break the deadlock. Bigelow, still standing, takes a sip from his coffee. "That's risky. What if the odd man out is a Republican?" Samuel frowns, "I could lose the presidency by a name in a hat." Samuel stands and walks over to the bay window. He pulls back the curtain and looks out at the crowd on the street. Continuing to look out through the window, he says, "Hewitt will be here later to discuss the particulars. He seems to think this is the best solution. He says the others think so too. I do not agree with any of them." He turns back to face Bigelow, and points back out the window. "I cannot let these people, who have believed and fought so hard for my presidency, think that I'll give it up so easily. They'll lose faith in me and our party." Bigelow walks over to Samuel and places his hand firmly on his shoulder. "Those people won't lose faith in you. They would lay down their lives to protect you." Samuel shakes his head in disgust. "They elected me to reform Washington, not to start another bloody war." In the New York Times building, John Reed is sitting behind his desk reviewing stories for the newspaper. A knock on his door disrupts his work when a messenger arrives carrying a large envelope. He waves the messenger in and signs for the package marked, "Confidential," from Zach Chandler. Reading the label, he says to the courier, "Thank you, and please close the door on your way out." He waits until his door is shut before opening the envelope. He pulls out the enclosed paperwork and reads, "The McCrary House Bill." Realizing the proposed bill is not something anyone else should be privy to, including himself, he walks over to his door and places a "Do Not Disturb" sign on his office window, closes the door and locks it. A few hours later at Tilden's house, Congressman Hewitt has arrived and is seated in a chair. He waits patiently while Samuel reviews the proposed revisions of the Electoral Commission bill. John Bigelow is still present and turns in his chair when he hears a knock on the adjoining doors to the living room. Looking up, Samuel calls out, "This is not a good time." Mary leans her head in and says, "Just wanted to let you know Mr. Marble and Hewitt have arrived." Samuel motions with his hand and says, "Send them in." Marble and Hewitt enter the room quietly and sit down next to Bigelow, who has traded his coffee for a glass of bourbon. Samuel continues to review the proposal silently and does not notice when Marble leans over and whispers in Bigelow's ear, "I wonder how many others have this report." Bigelow shrugs his shoulders, indicating that he doesn't know. Samuel finishes reading and with a deep sigh, places the documents on a nearby table. He looks to Hewitt, who is sitting across from Bigelow and Marble. "We need to discuss details." Hewitt replies, "Bayard and Thurman are absolutely committed to this bill. They concur with the Republican members." "How many oppose it in the House?" Samuel asks. "Several." He pauses for a moment. "The House committee has suggested killing it in the House." Samuel frowns and fires back, "Is it not rather late then, to consult with me?" Defensively, Hewitt barks, they will not consult with you. They are public men and they have their own duties and responsibilities. I consult with you and tell them your opinions. Samuel looks Hewitt in the eye. I know I cannot advise you or the other Democratic members to agree to the bill one way or another, but I will advise you as to the details. Hewitt feels the intensity in Samuel's voice. It is a behavior Samuel rarely displays because his normal persona is one of being a very patient and calm when he speaks. Samuel stands and waves the papers in the air. This is a raffle for the presidency and I know the voters would not approve of it. Nor do I. Bigelow and Marble sit in silence as they watch the two men exchange heated words. Hewitt fires back, "None of us in the party expect you to." Samuel takes a moment to compose himself and says in a more calm tone, "The way I see it, arbitration should be adopted into the bill. Then it would be the duty of the arbitrators to investigate and decide the case on its merits. This should be mandatory and would eliminate the element of gambling." He taps his fingers on the table and gazes toward the window. Samuel wrings his hands and continues, "Consider this. If you go into a conference with your adversary and can't break it off because you feel you must agree to something, you cannot negotiate. You will be beaten on every detail." Hewitt chimes in and asks, "What about the danger of collusion and force with President Grant?" Samuel looks at Hewitt and fires back a round of questions for Hewitt to think about. Why surrender now? You can always surrender, at any time. Why surrender before the battle for fear you may have to surrender after the battle is over? Bigelow, Marble and Hewitt nod in agreement. Samuel adds, "President Grant is in need of the next man to replace him, and I understand his position. He has served his country most of his life, fighting a bloody civil war and then following that as a two-term president. He's tired and wants to retire peacefully. There is nothing wrong with that. We all want the same, some sooner than later." Hewitt asks, "Do you agree to the 5 justices? They will be playing a major role in the special commission." Samuel explains, "There is no need for hot haste. We still have time to consult and to debate publicly. I do not like the secrecy surrounding this bill and I do not trust it. You must allow the others in the House to debate." Hewitt knows they are running short of time and says, "Congress moves at its own pace and will not wait on this issue. We need to discuss what we will do if the bill is adopted." Samuel looks over at Bigelow and Marble and shrugs his shoulders. "If that happens," he replies and looks back to Hewitt, "then they all act on their own judgments. I cannot be responsible for their actions. I am only advising you to bring my opinions before them to debate. I still have grave doubts any of this will succeed. It still amazes me that one newspaperman's last-ditch scheme to rob the voters of a duly elected president has turned so many in high office against me.